Today, we are going to build your first Python program. Along the way, you will also learn how to use comments to make your code easier to read and understand. Before we begin, let's quickly recap. So far, we've learned about variables, the 4 basic data types, 2 types of operators, how to accept input from the user, and how to convert values between data types. Today, we are going to bring all of those skills together to build our first complete Python program. We're going to build a simple pounds to dollars converter. Although we are using a currency converter as our example, the same approach can be used to build many other programs. Before we start writing any code, we should think about what our program needs to do. As programmers, we do this by writing an algorithm. An algorithm is simply a set of step-by-step instructions that describe how a program should solve a problem. Our goal is to create a program that works like the example shown on the screen. Let's look at the example on the screen. What do you think our program needs to do first? Take a moment to think about it. The first thing our program does is display a welcome message. So that becomes the first step of our algorithm. What should happen next? That's right, we need to ask the user how many pounds they would like to convert. Can we display the answer now? What do you think? Not yet. Before we can display the result, we first need to convert the amount from pounds into dollars. And once we perform the calculation, what is the final step? Exactly, we display the result to the user. Now that we've worked out the steps, we have our algorithm. Remember, an algorithm is simply a set of step-by-step instructions that describe what a program needs to do. Rather than writing code straight away, we will write our algorithm as comments. Why do you think we are using comments instead of writing the code immediately? Comments help us plan our program before we start coding. They're also useful for explaining sections of code, making programs easier for other programmers and even ourselves to understand later. Python ignores anything written after the hash symbol, so comments don't affect how the program runs. As you become more experienced, you will not need as many comments because some code is already clear enough on its own. Good comments explain why something is being done, not simply what the code is doing. Let's write our algorithm as comments. Now we are ready to turn our algorithm into a real Python program. We will walk through our comments one at a time and use what we already learned to write the code. You notice that I have left a blank line between each section. Python doesn't care about blank lines, but they make our code easier to read and keep everything organized. It's a good habit to get into. Let's start with our first comment. Display a welcome message. We've already learned how to display text in Python. Which function do we use to display something on the screen? That's right, the print function. So let's use it to display our welcome message. Now let's look at our next comment. Ask the user to enter an amount in pounds. We've already learned how to get information from the user. Which function do we use to ask the user to enter something? Yes, the input function. But there is something else we need to think about. If the user enters a value, how can we use that value later in our program? we need to store it in a variable. So let's create a variable called pounds and use input to get the value from the user. But remember something important. What data type does input return? That's right, a string. We are going to use this value in a calculation, so we need it to be a number. Which function can we use to convert the user's input into a float? Yes, the float function. So we can convert the value at the moment we receive it. Now let's move on to our next comment. Convert the amount into dollars. We know that £1 is approximately 1.343 US dollars at the time of recording. How can we use the value that the user entered in our calculation? That's why we stored it in the variable pounds. We can use that variable again. We will multiply pounds by 1.343 and store the result in another variable called dollars. Now we've performed the calculation. Let's look at our final comment. Display the conversion result. Which function have we already used to display information on the screen? That's right, the print function. This time, instead of displaying a piece of text, we want to display the values stored in our variables. So we can use print to display the number of pounds and the converted amount in dollars. Before we move on, there is one more message on the screen showing the exchange rate we're using. Can you add this to your program yourself? Think about how you could use the print function to display this additional information. And that's our first complete Python program. You may have noticed that the example on the previous slide and this slide included a convert button. If we were building a website or a graphical application, the conversion could happen when the user clicked that button. Our Python program doesn't have a button. Instead, when the user presses enter, the input function finishes and Python continues with the next line of code. So let's run our program and see what happens. Once you've completed this example, don't stop here. Try creating some converters of your own. You could convert kilometers to miles, for example, kilograms to pounds, or even create something completely different. Remember, the goal isn't just to build one converter. The important thing is to practice the process we use today. Plan the problem, write an algorithm, write the code, test the program. And as you build more programs, try to ask yourself the same questions. Which function have I learned that can help me to do this? Are we going to need this value again later? If we are, what do we need to do with it? That's right, we need to store it in a variable. How are we going to use this value? Will we need it in a calculation? If so, do we need to convert it to a different data type? What data type do we need? That's how you start thinking like a programmer. Let's quickly recap what you've learned today. Planning your program before writing code makes it much easier to solve a problem step by step. Comments are written for people, not for Python. They help explain your code, but Python ignores them completely. Choose meaningful variable names that describe the information they are storing. Remember that the input function always returns a string, so convert the value before performing calculations. Finally, don't worry about adding blank lines to organize your code. Python ignores them, but they make your program much easier to read. Before we finish, let's revisit another principle from the Zen of Python that you already seen. Readability counts. Now that you've written your first complete program, this idea is even more important. Programs aren't written just for computers, they're written for people too. Good code is easy to read, easy to understand, and easy to maintain. That's why we've used meaningful variable names, organized our code into sections, and added comments while planning our program. As you continue learning Python, try to write code that not only works correctly, but is also easy for someone else and your future self to understand.